I haven't seen it, you haven't seen it, but someone has. Someone who spent 20 years working in juvenile justice in New Hampshire who watched footage from July 17th and walked away afraid the child in it may have died. They won't give their name. And it's not because they're unsure of what they saw, because they're sure of what happens to people in this state who open their mouth. That's the show today, Retaliation. Not just what happened inside the Sununu Youth Services Center, though we're going there in full with the receipts. It's about the wall of silence being built around it in around time, brick by brick, and who's being asked to lay those bricks. I'm Gracie Gatto, and this is the Gracie Gatto Podcast. So what happened at YDC? Let's start with the facts, because facts are the only currency I deal in. Friday, July 17th, 2 residents at the YDC, Youth Detention Services, the state's juvenile detention facility in Manchester, housing kids between 13 and 17 who have been held by the courts, got into a fight, and one of them ends up hospitalized. Early reporting said a broken femur. What's emerged since is worse. According to a source who watched the surveillance video, someone NHPR is protecting because they fear retaliation from state officials. An older, larger youth threw the smaller resident against a wall, put him in a headlock, choked him, and flipped him upside down onto his stomach, still choking him with his head pulled back. The Office of the Child Advocate says its own report on the incident describes the child turning purple. He may have lost consciousness. There was one staff member in that room, one for 2 kids in crisis. He couldn't separate them, couldn't call for help in time. And here's the detail that should stop you cold. The clinical director, Dr. Samantha Warren, who's worked at YDC since 2021 under a Dartmouth Health contract, had recommended the teenager who did the assaulting be accompanied by a clinical coach, specifically to manage his anger and aggression. That recommendation did not happen on the ground that day. Warren wasn't in the building when it went down. She has since resigned, cited ethical concerns effective mid-August. State law says the Department of Health and Human Services has to notify the Child Advocate's office immediately when a child suffers a serious injury in the state's care. The Child Advocate, Cassandra Sanchez, says she found out 2 days later. 2 days for a child who may have stopped breathing. Now, here's where it gets structural, and structural is where I live. The Office of the Child Advocate is the only reason we know any of this. They were the first to report earlier this year that kids at YDC were being illegally restrained and held in isolation. That reporting is what triggered investigations by the Attorney General's office, the Disability Rights Center, and state lawmakers. Cassandra Sanchez has run that office since 2022. Governor Kelly Ayotte declined to reappoint her. Ayotte's pick to replace her was Diana Fenton, withdrew back in March after people raised fair questions about whether she could be impartial. Since then, nothing. No new nominee. Sanchez is required to leave her post this week. State law says an assistant child advocate should step up as acting child advocate when the seat is empty. Full powers included. But the Attorney General's office has told Sanchez's team it will not elevate anyone to that role. Instead, staff have been told to bring their findings to the AG's office directly while the position sits vacant. Sanchez's response: she's told her own team not to do that. Her instinct, and I want you to sit with this, to get to the investigation's findings public before handing them to the very office that's maneuvering to control the outcome. So, because the Attorney General's office already once published its own account of conditions at YDC that contradicted her staff's findings without ever consulting the people who did the actual investigating. Sanchez said it plainly in a public meeting this week. She's worried this could be intentional, a vacancy engineered, or at minimum conveniently timed, so the one independent watchdog in the building goes quiet right when it's closest to finishing its report. Neither the Attorney General's office nor the governor's spokesperson responded when asked about any of this. Let's talk about the through line. Who gets silenced and how? Here's where I want to zoom out because I've been sitting with something uncomfortable and I think you should sit with it too. A 20-year-old veteran of juvenile justice in this state won't put their name on a video that could save the next kid because they're afraid of what will happen to them and what the state will do to them for talking. That is not an isolated data point. That is a pattern. And once you know how to look for a pattern, you can't unsee it. Stacey Brown, for example, did the rigorous work on the Beaver Meadow golf course subsidy story and got the same treatment. She's an agent of chaos. None of that is coincidence. That's the machinery. When you can't win an argument on the facts, you make the person holding the facts too exhausted, too discredited, or too afraid to keep holding them. Sound familiar? But here's the crack in the wall, and it's the reason this episode exists at all. A scared source talked anyway. Cassandra Sanchez, on her way out the door, with nothing left to lose in terms of career protection, chose transparency over the quiet, institutionally approved path. Senator Victoria Sullivan stood up in a public meeting and said plainly, quote, they could not be trusted and failed as leaders, end quote, about the Commissioner of Health and Human Services and the Director of DCYF, and she's calling for the Executive Council to remove them both. Theory that talks anyway is still talking. That's the whole ballgame. The pattern has a name and a paper trail, so let's talk about it. I said this is a pattern. I don't get to just say that and walk away from it. So I'm going to fill you in. Receipts over vibes, man. So let's go over the receipts. It goes back to, let's start with the 1990s. The Youth Development Center, the facility that became YDC. When David Meehan's case finally went to trial in 2024, former staffers took the stand and testified in open court about a culture inside that building with an actual name for what happens to people who report abuse. They call it, and I quote, no rats. Karen Lemoyne, a counselor there from 1989 to 1991, said she reported what she saw to management more than once and got brushed off for it. Another state trooper investigating decades later testified she found the same thing echoing forward, a culture of silence and fear. That's not me editorializing. That's sworn testimony in a courtroom. Fast forward to St. Paul's School, 2017, then Attorney General Gordon MacDonald convenes a grand jury to investigate abuse allegations there. The grand jury does its work, and when it comes time to make the findings public, only 2 recommendations ever see the light of day. That whistleblowers need stronger protections, and that people under investigation should be told they're being investigated. Everything else in that report stayed sealed, after a motion to keep it private was filed by an attorney who, by the Attorney General's office own account, represented most of not all of the school's administrators and faculty under investigation. Okay, so that same attorney also represented the, surprise, surprise, the New Hampshire Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence pro bono in the very same manner. They got a contract with the school out of it. So I want to be precise here because precision is the whole job. That overlap, one lawyer, one client list, that includes both the people being investigated and an advocacy organization lobbying the Attorney General's office for how the investigation gets handled. is documented in public reporting, including by its own researcher. It's not a conspiracy theory, it's a conflict of interest sitting in plain view, and it's exactly the kind of arrangement that makes whistleblower protection recommendations look less like reform. Then there's Anna Kerrigan, a DHHS employee who spoke up publicly about the state failing abused and neglected kids. She was retaliated against for it, and that's not in dispute. The state paid her a settlement over it, with the condition she'd never work for New Hampshire again. When she came back with a second suit trying to force the state to actually spend what the law requires on child protection, the New Hampshire Supreme Court threw it out for lack of standing. And here's the detail that belongs in this episode. Chief Justice Gordon MacDonald had to recuse himself from that decision because when the case was first filed, back when he was Attorney General, it was his own office that moved to dismiss it. The same man shows up on both sides of the ledger, just at different points in his career. Now, a few threads I'm not pulling tight yet, because I hold myself to the same standard I hold the state to. I now have Ashley George's own account, in her own words, sent directly to the U.S. Attorney's Office in July of 2024, and raising concerns about how children in care were being supervised and treated. Concerns serious enough that she calls what she witnessed disturbing and says she has documentation. She says she was let go one day after her most recent public rally on the issue, after years without incident, over an attendance dispute she says doesn't hold up. I'm not going to walk you through a specific detail in her letter here. Some of what she describes involves the treatment of children in ways I won't narrate on this show, out of respect, because there's a difference between reporting that serious concerns were raised and turning her letter into content. So I can tell you, she sent it, she dated it, she named her employer and the U.S. Attorney's Office. By her account, never responded. That's a retaliation story I can stand behind once we've made every reasonable effort to reach her employer and Young's former office for comment, which is standard practice before any of this airs. One thread I looked into and can't use as described, the Sheriff Hillard question. The actual public record shows Attorney General MacDonald requesting that Merrimack County investigate whether Hillard belonged on the Lori list after his DWI conviction. And it was the county commissioner who resisted, not MacDonald, protecting him. That restraint is the point, not a weakness in it. The state gets to hide behind we can't comment on personnel matters. Different standard on purpose. So where does that leave us? A child hospitalized, possibly having stopped breathing in the state's care. A clinical director gone. A watchdog office about to sit empty at the exact time, or the exact moment its work matters. An attorney general's office maneuvering to fill that silence with itself. And a chain of people inside the system and outside of it who've learned the hard way that speaking up comes with a bill attached. I'm not going to pretend I have a tidy bow for this one. I don't. What I have is a commitment. A commitment to you, New Hampshire, anybody who's listening. We keep asking who's accountable when a 15-year-old resident of this state can be choked unconscious under state supervision, and the loudest response from the people in charge is a staffing memo. We need to do better. I'm Gracie Gatto. This is the Gracie Gatto Podcast, and I'll see you on the other side.